And so poet, author,
Translator,
translator,
professor.
poet, author, translator, professor. Okay. And we are live. Okay, we're joined this hour by poet, author, translator, professor. So many titles, so much already behind him, and so many things looking forward. So many brand new opportunities and adventures ahead of him that he's going to tell us about later. But first, we're joined this hour by David Bowles.
Bulls.
Dave
Yeah.
Bowles. David, can you tell us how your journey into all these things began? Like, tell us about how you became involved in the arts.
Well, I mean, a question like that like just begs to make you start at the very beginning. And the thing is, I grew up in a family of storytellers. My grandmother Garza was the family storyteller, and along with the kinds of spooky, creepy legends and histories that she would tell us. I had all my tios and tias tell me stories, and um, I think that's really what got me interested in the idea of writing, because as my grandmother's stories ran out and I kept pushing her for more, she basically told me, you need to learn to read, Güero, so that you can like stop bugging me and find stories in books. And it was, that learning how to read at a really early age that set me on this path of working with language in a variety of different ways, whether writing poetry or stories or novels or translating and things like that. When I was in junior high in McAllen, Texas, at Lincoln Junior High, which is now Lincoln Middle School, I had a great English teacher in 8th grade who kind of like pulled the lid off of poetry and exposed me to it in a way that got me super excited about it. And I spent the next few years writing poetry. And it's like a poor kid living in Section 8 housing and the projects or whatever. No money to spend on girls. The one thing I could do was write them poetry, and so it became, in my high school years, it became like this way to una forma de ligar, right? A way to kind of like hook up with girls. I also came from a very musical family, so I played the guitar and I was in a band and wrote songs, and all those things kind of like blended together and made me want to pursue. When I went to college, the study of literature. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do with it. I remember when I finally got married, my wife was all, "You haven't even finished college yet. What are you going to do?" And I'm like, "I guess I'm going to become a teacher." And so I ended up becoming a teacher, and then going on to get my doctorate and become a university professor. So, the storytelling, um, the use of words to evoke emotions, to preserve the past, to promote your family's values and stories and culture. Those are the kinds of things that motivated me, I think, to move it to come into the arts.
Yeah. So your story, where does the story begin? What's the backdrop for a story? Where's
So it's the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, man, South Texas. Where I have lived nearly my entire life. My family is from McAllen, Texas. Right across the border from Reynosa, and this is where I spent a good chunk of my childhood, all my teen years, and all of my adult life. So it's against this backdrop: the border, the river, the monte, um, the constant heat and humidity, and just Mexico like looming over everything. The Mexico that my grandfather Manuel's great grandparents came from in the 1880s, to come settle on some of the ranchos here in South Texas and blend with the families that had already been here for like hundreds of years before that. Um, and so definitely the border is, like, I guess, the center feature in all of my writing. If somebody had to do a dissertation and they were looking across everything, because I write science fiction, fantasy, children's books, poetry, I write all these. I have like 20 books, and they're like they range widely. But the one thing I think that is like the axis or the linchpin of all of them is the border, and the people that live here on the border and their roots in Mexico and Mexico's roots in Mesoamerica. And I think that informs nearly everything I do, and I think it always will. I can't write without the border being in the back of my mind.
Yeah, yeah. No, definitely. You're like the You're like the border Stephen King. You're so prolific. Can you tell us a little bit about because you kind of glossed over it. You were in a band.
Yeah. I was in a band. Well, I mean, I played music in church for a while. My dad, when I was 7, converted from Catholicism to evangelical Christianity, which was a lot of fun. And he ended up becoming a pastor because apparently it's super easy to be a pastor. Um, just need to be a Christian and like get somebody to like ordain you or whatever. And so he started a church, and I played the bass guitar, and then eventually the guitar, and like during the the worship service when people would be singing and stuff like that. And so that was like my first foray into standing up in front of people and playing music. And then I joined a band called New Citizens in, I guess it was 1986. And we were together for a couple years and played shows around the valley, Battle of the Bands, played at like like summer camps and churches and just wherever we could, and recorded a little demo. And then when we graduated from high school, everybody went their separate ways. And I played in I played a few gigs with cover bands, so forth. But eventually, I kind of like realized that wasn't going to be my thing. I still play music. I recorded a lot of music, like as an independent musician, released them through Amazon when I was in my 30s. Then all that music is up on my website because I just give it away for free now. Like anybody wants to torture themselves listening to my music, well, it's not that bad. Anybody wants to like spend their quarantine listening to some music by me, they can find it on my website.
If anyone wants another side of Bulls,
Yeah, another side of Bulls. So go listen to his crazy ass music.
Bulls is deeper than you think.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
hidden depths.
that's right. So a large part of this of the series we're doing is trying to capture some oral histories and people talk about things that are still ongoing or things that were once there and just capture the memory of it. So can you tell our audience a little bit about some of the clubs and scenes and places you would play when you were in the band there in the Rio Grande Valley?
So I mean, the '80s was a pretty sparse time for. There wasn't a whole lot of stuff going on. It was pretty. The scene was sparse. You could play sometimes at the university. There were not a whole lot of clubs, and especially because we were teenagers, it was a lot harder for us to get gigs playing in, Fast Eddie's or something like that. We had to go different routes. But some of the clubs where you could, and I mean, some of my friends who were more into like the hip hop scene had a little more success with things like Club X in McAllen, which was super popular when I was in college. Man, I mean, living in the late '80s and early '90s, it was such a weird thing. There's such a wealth of things for young people to do nowadays, or for people who liked the nightlife. But back then, there was so little. That we played birthday parties and quinceañeras. We played quinceañeras, bodas, lo que hubiera. We were just like we were down for it. And because we played like rock music, it was also more limited. Because had we been like a Tejano band, or had we played conjunto or country, there would have been more opportunities. But the Valley in the late '80s, early '90s, there was basically everybody moved away and would go to like Austin or Houston or like completely out of Texas if they were really gonna follow that dream. It was tough here, not a whole lot. It's a great documentary, the name of which I can't remember right now, about the music scene in the Valley, that was done by these really great guys, great filmmakers from this area. I recommend people looking it up. I feel foolish that I can't remember the name of it right now, but
Right.
just Google it and you should Rio Grande Valley music scene documentary and you'll find it.
Yeah. So most people, the Rio Grande Valley is one of those places that a movie might begin, and then you have your hero and he's got kind of a Good Will Hunting type scenario or something
Yeah.
like
Yep.
that. and he's got to go to Houston or Dallas or even New York or Los Angeles or something like that. But and you have had one of those lives where like like starts here, all these things, there's all these opportunities, all this flourishment, but you have chosen to stay in the Rio Grande
That's
Valley.
right. I feel
Yeah.
really really proud of that too. And I don't mean to like to diss people who move away. And a lot of my friends have. I think of people like in certain careers kind of require it. Like my friend Alvaro Rodriguez. We grew up together when we were teenagers, and now he lives between LA and New York City, and he's a screenwriter and producer and stuff like that. That kind of career, working in Hollywood, it's tough to live in South Texas and work in Hollywood. Really, really, it is. Although I suspect that after this COVID-19 pandemic, we will have invented ways of doing that kind of work remotely that we weren't even thinking about before. But yeah, so many people that I know that I care about who wanted to pursue their dreams went off, and I got married. I got married, and we had kids, and we stayed, and I became a teacher and then a professor. And while simultaneously working to support my family and build a home and give my kids the things that growing up a lot poorer than my kids did, I wasn't able to have. I continued to work on my writing, but it just was one of those things that I knew when the time was right, um, things would align themselves. The stars would align, opportunities would arise. If I worked on myself, if I became the best I could through study and reading and writing over and over again, practicing, polishing my skills, that when the door opened finally, I would be ready to step through it. It's one of my big philosophy statements is you can't change anything in the world. All you do is change yourself. And if you make yourself the best that you possibly can be, when the world decides, um, if you think about Taoism, if you think of Taoism as the river, and again, the border at the center of my thought all the time, the river has many bends and many resakas, lots of little oxbow lakes, and eventually you'll come around a bend and there'll be this open place for you to do what you need to do. The river knows where to take you if you're ready, but if you're not, it'll take you to the place and you won't be able to step up and do what needs to be done. So here in the valley, and I continue living in the valley, and then I have a house in Mexico and the state of Oaxaca on the coast. I'm able to do all the things that any other writer can do. I don't need to live in New York City to be a successful writer. I don't need to live in LA to work on screenplays and stuff like that. I can insist on being where I am and not let others displace me or uproot me. And again, other people make different choices, and that's fine. I'm not trying to say that they're letting themselves be manipulated. They make those choices because they think it's the most the valid path for them. But I've chosen to stay here, and it is hard. People are like, oh, I wish you could just come over to this party we're having, but it would take like, a couple of days of flying and travel to get wherever other people are.
Yeah.
But there's something a lot more meaningful about being rooted in place and living where your parents lived, where your grandparents lived, where your great grandparents lived, where there are deep, deep roots, where every tree and stone and there are no hills here, but every little oxbow lake, every resaca has meaning for you that's deep and intergenerational. And I think that comes across in my work as well. My work is definitely centered in that deeper sense of family and tradition and place than it would be otherwise.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I mean it's quite an achievement because even people who live in Los Angeles, if they want to publish, if they want to get involved in some of these major publications, they typically have to like move to like Chicago or New York or something like that to get
Yeah,
into
yeah.
traditional veins of publishing. So you've managed to do that. You've managed to live in the place you were writing about, and that place not be New York, and that's very, very impressive for any author. To get published by some of these major publications. But I know you have a lot on the horizon with some of these the big publications. But a lot of your start comes from like independent presses and working with your own
That's right.
independent press, starting your own, and also working with other independent presses.
Yeah,
Can
indie
you
presses are so important. Oh my God. Um, they were super important in launching my career. My very first book, which is a collection of short stories, I pitched to various university presses and tried to get an agent for. But at the time, especially, it was really really hard to get anybody interested in short story collections. And people even today kind of like they prefer anthologies with multiple authors and not collections. But after I had become director of English language arts at a school district here in the Valley, I was at a conference, the conference of the CREST is what it's called, the Coalition of Reading and English Supervisors of Texas, not the toothpaste. And I noticed that there was an editor there whose small press out of Spring, Texas, near Houston, puts out educational books and occasionally children's books as well. And I was like, I am going to go up to this guy and I'm gonna cold pitch him my collection because now I have a I don't know, I felt like the moment was right, and I went up to him and asked him to give me 30 seconds, and I pitched it to him. YA short stories that are accessible for Mexican American kids, centered in the Rio Grande Valley, and he asked me to send him the first three stories, and and after that he loved it and published it, and from there on out, like bit by bit, it was small publishers, indie publishers, university presses, where I found the optimal outlet for what I was creating at a time when agents and big publishers just didn't get the kind of voice that I was trying to put across and the kind of place centeredness that was important to my work. The things didn't really begin to change too much until my book, The Smoking Mirror, won an award from the American Library Association, and it's unusual that a book published by a indie press. This indie press actually was out of Australia, and they had just set up shop in the U.S. And that book, oh my God, was rejected by dozens of agents and publishers. It was so hard to get published. Too much Spanish. No white characters. Can't you add a white sidekick so these Mexican American characters can explain some of this weird stuff to the audience? It was just the idiocy that agents wanted me to do.
Yeah.
Is that I just think back at me da una rabia. It makes me so upset. And when it won this award, suddenly all kinds of agents came out of the woodwork, and people who had rejected my work before were like, "Oh, hey, so do you have a project maybe you want to pitch us?" And here's the tricky thing. At that point, like you like what you want to do is say, "Nombre, you rejected me before."
Yeah.
I'm not gonna. But you have to say, "I was an unknown before, and I was a risk they couldn't take." But now that I've proven myself in this way and gotten an award from a major, a major award from the American Library Association, they're willing to take a chance now, and you just take those opportunities. And I tell writers that writing is like that. It is you're building a base. Every publication you have begins to build a readership for yourself. It begins to create a body of work that people can point to and assess. And you should never turn your nose up, especially when you're starting out, at those opportunities, but use them all to build a foundation upon which you build the next levels. After I got my first contract for that first book, I realized that I wanted other Valley authors to not have to struggle to get that first publication. There needed to be, for people in the Valley, an entryway, small press that would take them seriously where the even bigger indie presses might not. And so my wife at the time had a nonprofit called Valley Artistic Outreach that she had formed with a couple of artists as part of the McAllen Art Walk, back when it really was an art walk and not the joke that it is today. Sorry. People from McAllen will know exactly what I'm talking about. So I went to them and proposed this idea of starting this small boutique press. And it originally was called VAL Publishing, VAL being the abbreviation of Valley Artistic Outreach. And then over time it evolved into Flower Song Books, which is now Flower Song Press, run by Edward Vidaurre. we put out some anthologies initially of Valley writers, um, publishing for the first time people who have gone on to have, or maybe not always for the first time, but publishing some of the early work by authors who've gone on to do some really big things like Rubén Degollado. Um, and then we started publishing the work of different writers, Mayra Infante, Edward Vidaurre, Erika Johnson. So it was a great experience doing that, but it wasn't something I could keep up. And as my writing career began to take off, especially after I won that award, and I was suddenly getting calls from bigger publishers and agents wanting to represent me, I handed the press off to Edward Vidaurre, and he's done a really great job. He's really picked up the rhythm of publication. He's got a good eye and a good ear, and he's put out some great work, like your poetry collection. And I'm really, really excited about all the stuff that's coming down the pipe. I've encouraged him to start up the YA or children's imprint that we started to launch, but that kind of like fizzled. And so he's working on that as well. I'm really, really excited about all the things that my baby is continuing to do.
Up.
Yeah, I mean, I gave it up in adoption, but Edward's a great parent. So
yeah. Well, there was recently a like 30 books to read or something, like 30 books to read right now of from Latinx authors, a poetry book collection. And I think
yeah,
there was 30, and there was like 5 of them for Flower Song.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome, right?
Yeah, it was put up by like NYU, so or someone at NYU. So that's like really like that's a really exciting thing. And so really the press is definitely making strides. I mean, I was one of them, so disclosure or whatever. But but
deservedly so. It's really
yes. No, thank you. I'm very good. But there's 4 other authors from the press, and that really speaks a lot to the press and not just individual authors.
Exactly.
The press is really moving. But I want to touch on something you said earlier about how you made this raw kind of this on the spot pitch. I think that's kind of that there's something that a lot of people don't really understand because they're waiting to get discovered. They're waiting for these moments to happen. They're waiting for things to happen.
Your ass is not getting discovered. No one's gonna like suddenly swoop down and find you reading at some like little poetry reading in your rinky-dink ass town. You've got to put yourself out there. Yes, I suppose it's possible that for a very small minority of people that somebody will discover them. The majority of us, however, have to work it. You've got to get out there, you've got to hustle. And I mean, the thing is, hustling and writing are not things that usually go hand in hand. Usually right. Writers are introverts who don't want to get out there. And I had the good fortune of, even though I am an introvert, of having a dad who forced me to get up in front of people and talk and play music, and then getting married to a woman who's super extroverted and was able to coach me in lots of different things. And now it just feels like second nature. I can pull this mask of extroversion up and make it work. But networking, meeting people, garnering a reputation, all these things are super important. Becoming interested in the work of other writers, of other more established writers, talking about their work, promoting their work, connecting with them on social media. They see you as an ally, somebody who is like a fan, also a writer who's pushing their work. These things make you a more palatable possible friend to other authors, and that's something that you want, because established authors are going to be on the lookout for more Machiavellian up and comers who are simply looking to latch on and ride your coattails. There's some people are going to like hear what I'm saying and think that I'm contradicting myself, but there's a difference between like with the best of intentions and with a good heart and with actual enthusiasm for an author's work, for you to promote that author's work and connect to that person and kind of like, it sounds horrible to say it this way, but like worm your way into their inner circle because you genuinely like them and you genuinely want to know more about them and learn their ropes for them.
Yeah.
Than just to see somebody who's having success and say, well, let me like ride in in the wake of this boat for a while until I'm able to go off on my own. And then you like afterwards you just like ignore the person. And I've had a mix of those experiences. I've had authors who get close to my wife and to me and to my family and then kind of like just give us the finger later on.
Yeah.
And then I've had experiences where writers, get close to us and I'm able to take them under my wing and promote them, and we remain friends for a long time afterwards. And so that's what I would say to up and coming authors: like, just find the right balance. Be careful about seeming too thirsty. Be careful about letting your desire to be popular overwhelm you. But you do have to work it. You do have to network. You do have to go to places and meet people, and not be afraid to approach editors and things like that. Otherwise, just nothing is going to happen.
Right. You're giving away all my secrets, David.
I know.
Because that's exactly.
I know you wanted me to sign a non-disclosure agreement ahead of time, Matt. I said, "Chale, way, no, that's not going to happen."
Yeah, no, that is that. No, but that's exactly right. I mean, I often tell people, I often tell people, because when I do panels, like like you can't approach somebody like don't approach people who are like ahead of you with just your heart in your hand. I mean, don't with your hat out. I mean, you gotta approach them with an opportunity that's mutually beneficial. Like
Yeah.
there's a work opportunity that can like benefit you, benefit me, and and if you're that person that's trying to move up, you're gonna have to do the majority of the work, and you have to accept that that's just true.
Yeah.
That's just true. And
I mean, you can't expect somebody who's like gone through the steps that you're going through to like come back down the ladder, put you on their shoulder, and then climb back. That's not gonna. No one's gonna do that. No one.
Do that. Yeah.
No, because if they were that kind of person, they wouldn't be where they are.
Yeah, exactly. Including me. Anyone watching out there, that's not.
If you think that Matt's gonna like be like giving you a ride, giving you like a machito up the ladder, that shit ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, no. So I always try to have a hand up and a hand down, but
yes, that's an excellent way to put it. The hand up to pull yourself up, the hand down to pull people up with you. And to the best of your ability, you open the door to that's just so important. And that's one of the reasons that I'm proud of that early work that I did. When I started having success, I knew this is that moment for me to take the little success I'm having and parlay it into greater success for more people, because it is going to get harder to do that as I have more success. I'll be more and more limited in time, because one of the things that might strike other authors as a paradox is that the more successful you come, the more work you have to do, the busier you are, the more demands there are on your time, and you can't just like drop everything and run down to the local open mic that they tell you about 5 days in advance, because you've got your shit planned out months in advance, or maybe even a year in advance, because you've got your PR people at the different publishing firms and your agent and your editor. Everybody is like micromanaging your time for you, and you some people are going, oh, boo hoo, I'm sure it's horrible to have success. That's not what I mean. I'm just saying you can't expect people who already have all those demands on their time to take on more of a burden, because they just won't. Human beings are not built that way. We're not, only saints are like that, and that's why there's so few of them.
That's right. But like bit by bit, brick by brick, I mean.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Hang on a second, because I can't hear you now. Let's see what happens. We're having the same issue. Suddenly your voice just disappeared.
You can't hear me.
So
all right.
And we're live on Facebook. Hey.
And we're live.
You're gonna have to like start signing to me. We could like use the chat, and you could ask me questions.
I'm gonna that's what I'm gonna do.
Oh my gosh. What in the world happened? Okay. All right, I'm looking.
Right.
It's probably either my connection or your connection. So The Smoking Mirror is the first book in a middle grade fantasy series called Garza Twins. Kind of like think about like Percy Jackson or something like that, but instead of white kids combating like European monsters and gods and so forth, with an occasional like person of color as their sidekick, it's Mexican American kids from the Rio Grande Valley, from the town of Donna, where I'm at right now, who discover they're shapeshifters and they have to use their powers to fight against dark gods of chaos from the Aztec and Mayan pantheon. And so the series, which is going to be 5 books, I'm working on book 4 over the next couple of months. It, basically takes that sense of that old story about what happens when you have all this power, the kind of Spider-Man thing, with great power comes great responsibility, and you discover that power is not enough, or that power is not the answer. And in each book, the twins, Johnny and Carol Garza, become more and more powerful, and are facing off against more and more like dire threats. And by the end of book 5, they realize that it's their own power, because the main god they're fighting against is Tezcatlipoca, the god of chaos, and his goal is to end the 5th age of the world. He thinks humans suck. He's done with us. He's ready to move on. Time to create a new sun, a new age, a new planet. And he tells them in the very first, like the arc of the book is laid out, and of the series laid out in the very first book, where he tells them, I am putting you through this because I want to drive you to despair. I want to drive you to a moment where you will have so much power and you will feel so much despair that you will use your power exactly the way I want you to break open the prison where the Tsitsimine are locked away, the star demons, and they will come and they'll consume the stars and the earth, and the world will be laid waste. And I want in book 5 for them to come to a point where they realize that that's going to happen if they use their power. Because like, what happens when you realize that power is not enough, that individual power is not enough, that sometimes you have to set aside your individual power for the good of the community, for the group.
Yeah. So can you read the question?
Cool. So now this book is I'm just looking at the question. It's a great question. So I mentioned before explaining the book's kind of like synopsis or whatever, that it was really hard to get that kind of a book published, because the main character is a Mexican American. The story happens in the Rio Grande Valley in Mexico, and also in the Aztec underworld in Mictlan. There's a lot of Spanish being used because they're Mexican American kids and they use Spanish with each other all the time. All the names are in Spanish or in Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs. And the agents and editors just thought it was going to be too difficult for their readership. They were just convinced that the readers needed some kind of like filter. They needed a white character in there because they assume that readers are white people. Like clearly readers can't be Latinos. Like clearly that was the fucking attitude, right? And so their insistence that I cut back on the Spanish, that I include a white character, that I find ways of shortening the Aztec names. Do we have to call him Quetzalcoatl? Can't we just say Quetzal? Wouldn't that be like, like cuter and like punchier? And I'm like, no, fuck you. We're not going to call Quetzalcoatl Quetzal because you can't say Quetzalcoatl. It's absurd. And the thing, I know you're rephrasing your question, but I just want to mention here that you talk about how in books about other countries and other artists and so forth, that there are no demands made on them to explain, like in the example you give, explain French history people when you're talking about French artists in a book. 2 things I think happen. Number one, obviously it was a middle grade book, and so there's this expectation that because there's a lot more money made off of middle grade and young adult books than there is off of anything else, publishing companies, they want to have something that fits that market standard for what these kids are consuming, so they'll buy lots of books, right? But also there's a stigma about being Latinx, about being Mexican American. Our culture is not seen as the same as French culture. No one's going to say, demand that there be some kind of like deep explanation or even justification for why you write about French culture and French artists. They are going to demand that from Mexican American, about Mexican American culture, because they don't see our culture as particularly useful or interesting or worthy of research. I mean, it's a culture of like jardineros and criadas and housekeepers. That's the attitude that people have in this country towards Mexican American culture. So anytime that we're working with that kind of milieu, that's the kind of pushback we get. Things are changing, but that's definitely the way it was 2013, 2014 when I was trying to get the book published.
Yeah, so we're fighting. I know you can't hear me, but I'm going to type it down here. We're fighting these kind of twin oppressions of misrepresentation and underrepresentation. It seems like people fight the underrepresentation and make compromises with misrepresentation. So how do we fight with dignity? It's going to take a second to finish writing this. Misrepresentation. How do we fight with dignity? And this is actually better than the other service was doing. So everyone, I'm sorry.
Oh, got it. Okay. So, yeah, the twin oppressions of misrepresentation and underrepresentation. Lots of people fight underrepresentation, and they make compromises with misrepresentation. And this is one of the things that Dignidad Literaria, the kind of like movement that I co-founded along with Roberto Lobato and Miriam Gurba, and good folks at Presente.org, is fighting for. Like when we sat down at the table with Macmillan Flatiron on February 3rd, one of the things that we talked about right away is we don't want to hear platitudes about diversity, because that's what they always give us when they want to talk about the underrepresentation and say, oh, but we're doing what we can. We are all about diversity. We're trying to get writers in. But they don't want to talk about the equity that needs to exist in that representation, because it's not enough to undo the lack of representation. That representation needs to be good representation, needs to be authentic, and it needs to be equitable, in that you can't just like bring in a voice here and there and say, oh, it's all done, when there's such a gap in the publishing world, and it's so many years of, in this case, Latinx authors being kind of frozen out of the big five, that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to set things aright. We need to stop making compromises. Basically, we need to armarnos de valor and sit down and say, we are not gonna fucking let you get away with this anymore. And that's exactly what we did. I mean, they were like, we are not going to give you any kind of answer at the end of this 2-hour meeting. And we said, yes, you are. We're not going to leave here. We've got a press conference scheduled for right after this meeting. We are not going to go down and talk to our gente and tell our comunidad that we came away from this meeting with nothing. You are going to give us something because you're going to give us something. And they were taken aback. They were not ready for these Chicanos to sit down at the table and pulled out those kinds of demands. But that's what's required. You can't play by their rules. That's the mistake that every fucking buddy makes. If you go in there and you play by their rules, they win because they made the rules. You have to blow those rules up, and you have to be the one who sets the baseline and says, this is what you're going to do. This is what we want. Tell us how you're going to make it happen. We'll give you some wiggle room and the things that you can do to make it happen. But here's the baseline of things we will not accept any less than. And here we are. I mean, they agreed. Macmillan, one of the 5 big publishers, one of the most powerful corporations in the United States, agreed to what we were asking them. They said, okay, we will come up with a plan within 90 days. That plan will include the ways in which we're going to improve Latinx representation, both in the books we acquire and in the editors that we hire. We are going to give you a progress report at the 30-day mark to show you that we're actually working on it. And they've been living up to it. They hired Nayeli Nieto, a really, really great Latina editor. They gave us their progress report. We are in constant communication with them. And even in the midst of this COVID-19 crisis, they're working to fix these issues in the way they can. And how did that happen? Because we refused to play by the rules. We refused to shut up. We didn't care that Oprah Winfrey was trying to shut us up. We didn't care that people were like painting us as crazy reactionaries. I don't care that my review on Goodreads, for example, has hundreds and hundreds of vulgar, horrible comments from people who are like, it's just a work of fiction. Why are you making such a big deal? You fucking hack and da 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 da. You can't care about it. The fight has to be fought on our terms and not their terms. And I think that's key.
Tell us more about Miriam. Tell us more about Ruru.
So, Medium had written a review of American Dirt at the request of a magazine. And when she turned the review in, they were like, oh my God, this is like really, really negative. Can you find something positive? Because there's like this real reluctance to push back against the Big Five with a negative review, especially when it's a book that they have anointed ahead of time as the book of the season, like they had with American Dirt. And she was like, well, no, I'm not going to. And so they paid the kill fee, which is, when you hire somebody to do something, if you decide not to publish it, you still have to pay them something anyway. And then she published it on her own. And that, you're not Steinbeck Pendejo or whatever the title of it is, went viral. And it was the thing that got me interested in reading the book for myself. And when I did and saw all the things that she was talking about just for myself, I joined my voice to hers and warning people about this. And that's what it started out as, like, just, this is not a good book. It's full of misrepresentation and stereotypes. And the problem is that because it's not written for Mexicans or Mexican Americans, it's written for white people, or just like non-Mexican Americans, non-Mexicans, mainly white people. It's going to, ostensibly, it's written to try to get them to see Mexicans and Mexican Americans and Central Americans as human beings, which they fucking should be doing anyway. But what it does is it's going to give a twisted view of what the actual concerns are, the actual reasons for people fleeing the countries they're fleeing, and the actual things they have to face up against, because it does it in this big budget Hollywood, over the top, thing. And then the protagonist is a light-skinned Mexicana middle class who owns a bookstore and is like fluent in English, and like, it's just obviously crafted to make white women go, oh, I feel so good now. I can pat myself on the back because I understand the plight of these people to the South. And we wanted to call bullshit on that. We weren't trying to cancel the book or whatever, but we wanted people to know that it's a dangerous book. And people like lost their shit about it. People like, you can't do that. You can't be pushing back against the Big Five. Who are you? Like, basically, like what they told Miriam. They said, you're not a big enough author for you to say these things about this book, which is crazy. And so, we were doing that work, and then Roberto Lovato, who had been part of Presented.org and one of the people who'd gotten fucking Lou Dobbs removed from CNN, that motherfucker. Anyway, I'm using a lot of vulgarity. I apologize ahead of time. He reached out to us and said, I think that we should think about maybe using this moment to pivot away from American Dirt into a conversation with Flatiron, the imprint of Macmillan, who published this, to see whether we can get them to make some concessions and help us to bring equity to some degree to publishing. And so we reached out, wrote a letter to them asking if we could sit down and talk to them, and they were like, immediately, they responded within like 2 hours, which is unheard of, and agreed to meet with us in New York. And these two guys, I hadn't met them before. We met in New York. There's that famous picture that we took. And they're just, it's so cool. A lot of times you do activism and you're like, you're the activist, and other people are like oh, I like the idea of activism, but they don't like do the work. And Roberto Medium, they do the work. And it's so refreshing to be with other people who are not just talking about it, they're doing something, because the time for talking is over. We've been talking about this disparity and inequity in publishing for like 4 decades, and we need to talking and start forcing people to do stuff. That's why we're now calling on the governor. If we weren't for the fact that we're in the middle of this COVID-19 crisis, there would probably be more action on it. But calling on the governor to investigate the Big Five, because they are in New York State and there are laws against the kind of discriminatory practices that are being implemented in these publishing houses. And we want, not like a criminal investigation to be open, but just to have a workplace investigation open and let's look into it. Are they doing everything that they can do? Because they say they are, but they're 85% white. And that doesn't happen just naturally in a city as diverse as New York City. And so Medium is fierce, chingona, so brilliant. People underestimate her, like especially white people, because she's like a short chicana, right? And they have these preconceived notions of what that means, and she comes in with like her brilliance and eloquence and fierce power, and just shuts people the fuck down when they start like trying to gaslight her or whatever. You don't even have to step in. I mean, you step in as an ally, but she's already like just shutting all of that nonsense down right away. And she did several times during the meeting. Roberto is, one of these kind of like old school radicals, love him to death. He's got like a fierce, like almost a militia-like mentality, very regimented in his way of pushing back against, authoritarian tendencies in the world and capitalism, so forth. And so I think we work really well together. The strengths of one might shore up the weaknesses of another, and as a team we were really able to get a lot accomplished.
So we have a question from the audience.
A question from the audience. David Garcia Ordaz.
So David asks, is a certain
yeah, totally. Hybridity to me is super important. As somebody who lives in what Gloria Anzaldúa terms Nepantla, in this middle place, not just because of coming out of like traditional mestizaje, in the sense of like Mexican Americans or Mexicans are blends of indigenous and European, but also because I have a white parent, and so there's an additional mestizaje of Mexican American with Anglo culture that kind of was formative in my identity. I've learned that there's real power in existing in that in-between place and not allowing the confines of other identities or other genres or whatever to restrict you. It means that you can play around with things, blending, for example, science fiction and fantasy. There's a tradition in the United States that's being violated a lot recently by great writers of color like N.K. Jemisin. Nora does amazing stuff with her work, but just like this blending of science fiction and fantasy and horror in ways that might take other people aback, but that feel natural to somebody who's grown up in a culture that believes that magic is real, that knows that magic is real, that can demonstrate magic is real. And you grow up that way. Magic isn't just like this fantasy thing that you lay on top of things. It's like an integral part of the world. So when you're telling a science fiction story, there's still magic, because magic is part of your worldview. And that's difficult, I think, for some people to understand. It's one of the reasons I translate sometimes speculative fiction written by Mexicans into English for our consumption here in the States. And a lot of times those stories feel so fresh and daring and just out there to American readers, when in a way it's kind of like just the way stories have always been in Mexico. They don't have ciencia ficción, fantasía, terror. They have like this one basket that all that stuff fits in, which feels a little more natural to me. So in like my collection of short stories, Chupacabra Vengeance, you'll find all these different things and blends of them. And I don't particularly feel the need to tease them out. I have a graphic novel coming out in the winter, the first of a 3-volume series called Clockwork Curandera, and it is a blending of like steampunk technology and Mesoamerican, like indigenous magic. And those things may seem to almost be incompatible, but in this alternate South Texas, northern Mexico that I imagine called the Republic of Santander in 1865, those things coexist. So blending those together, yes, definitely a function of my upbringing on the border in Nepantla, both geographically and in terms of identity.
You've worked as a translator for many years. I've interviewed someone recently talking about language justice, and it was a really interesting idea to me. I want you to tell us a little about the role of translators and why they're so important. I'm gonna put it right here.
Okay, so I really like being a translator. I've got some like multiple things that I've translated coming out pretty soon. Um, the really interesting thing about being a translator is that you have to take a story written in this particular language with its conventions and its cultural underpinnings and references and so forth, and find a way to make that story work in another language with a completely different set of cultural underpinnings and references and so forth. That job is not just the same as taking those individual words or sentences, whatever, and rendering them in the new language. It's about interpretation, about um, finding the right lens through which to project the original work, so that on the screen of the mind of the reader in the target language, you create the same effect. And that means you have to acquire a deep understanding of the story that you're translating, and you have to have both a deep understanding of the culture you're translating from and the culture you're translating into. And it is like this complex task that's really difficult to explain to people. But when you're in the midst of it, it's almost like you're high on drugs because your brain is like holding at the same time two different languages, two different ideological systems, two different worldviews, and like just bouncing back and forth between them. Dum, 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 dum. And it is exhilarating when you're really up, when you're in the groove and you're doing it right. I recently translated. I probably shouldn't say this, but I know there's at least one piece of information about that out there. So whatever. So I recently translated a book by a Colombian author, Francisco Montaña Ibanez, No Comas Renacuajos, into English. And that was really intense, because translating Colombian Spanish with all of its formalities, the use of usted, the very specific slang that's used in Bogota, into English that middle grade and young adult readers in the United States will resonate with, that was something else. That was crazy. Translating from Nahuatl into English is even more insane, because like how do you take the worldview of the Mexica of the Aztecs and translate it into something that will resonate for modern readers of English verse? That kind of tricky stuff is exhilarating, and what it requires is that you not only understand the language and the culture, but that you be a writer yourself. You can't be a translator if you're not a writer, because there's as much, I wouldn't say there's as much, that's probably the wrong way to say it, but there's so much of you in that translation, so much of your choices, your aesthetics, your understanding of what it means to do certain things in terms of writing, that that if you're not a writer, you can't pull it off. You can't.
So for those just joining us, David can't hear me, so I'm typing questions.
Okay.
Very tempting to say things to him and type different things, but I'm not going to do that. I promise you, I'm not going to do that. Now I'm going to ask him to tell us about a collection of poetry he wrote called They Call Me Güero, which has been very successful.
So, They Call Me Güero, which is just won a ridiculous number of awards, and like just that book is I don't know, it's a gift that keeps on giving. It came about in the strangest way possible. And for you to understand like why it's a special book, I kind of have to bore you with the details of how it came about. So right after Trump was elected, we all remember that those harrowing 2 weeks after the election where people were like wandering around in this fog, like, what is going on? The National Council of Teachers of English held their annual convention in Atlanta, Georgia. It was 10 days after the election. Janet Wong and Sylvia Bardell, who are scholars of children's literature, poetry specifically, and poets in their own right, especially Janet, finished up a session, and a bunch of teachers came up to them and said, our students are they're losing it. We have Muslim students, we have African American students, we have Latinx students, many of them from families where they're undocumented people, and they are besides themselves. They're crying. They don't know what's going to happen. They've heard so many horrible things from this president. That we need some tools to help them grapple with what they're feeling. And we think that an anthology of poetry that centers on this sort of thing could be helpful. So Janet and Sylvia decided that they were going to try to pull this off. They were going to try to put together a book that teachers could use with students that would have poetry and allow students to respond to that poetry and do all kinds of activities around that and get it out by Inauguration Day, which is crazy. We're just talking a few months. They didn't get it out by Inauguration Day, got it out by Martin Luther King Jr. Day, but it still was impressive. And they reached out to me and they asked me if I would take, they said, we read this poem by you called Border Folk. It was published in Border Census in 2015. And it's a great poem about a man and his son going to Mexico, and the man is reflecting on these different things. And we would love to have a poem like that, but written for a younger audience with that same like texture and complexity. And so I said, yeah, of course. And I wrote it and called it Border Kid, and kind of acknowledgement of the poem Border Folk, which that maybe if we have time, you'll let me read in a second. And that it was accepted into their anthology. Then it got reprinted a few months later in the Journal of Children's Literature. And then I got inducted into the Texas Institute of Letters. And that year, 2017 now, the annual conference was held in El Paso for the first time in the 80-year history of the Institute. And what you have to do when you're inducted, which means that somebody's nominated you, somebody seconded it, then the governing council has vetted you and approved you, and then you've been put on a ballot and the membership has voted you in, then you have to get up and read for 10 minutes. And, no big deal. Just Sandra Cisneros and Larry McMurtry and Carmen Tafoya. No pressure. So I got up and I read 4 poems, and the last one was that poem, Border Kid. And as I was coming down off the stage, Bobby Bird, the one of the owners of Cinco Puntos Press in El Paso, came up to me, gave me a hug, and he said, David, if you can write 40 more poems in that kid's voice, I want to publish it, because we need this book. We need that kid's voice, and we need what I can see you're trying to do with this poem. And so that kind of thing doesn't usually happen. But yes, on the strength of one poem, he gave me a contract, and I wrote the poems, and it kind of evolved. At first, it was just going to be a collection of poems written in this kid's voice, but it evolved from that into a novel in verse. We went through multiple drafts just to get everything like tight and exactly right. I had the kid, it's about a 12-year-old boy in 2019 in Trump's America, and he's a Mexican-American kid, light-skinned Mexican-American kid, grappling with the fact that he's got privilege because of his light skin, but he belongs to a community of color that is being, hated and vilified in the press and by people in the surrounding communities. But he's a kid who's discovered poetry, and he's grappling with what it means to be who he is through his gift of poetry. And that sounds really somber, but it's actually full of a lot of fun, and there are just crazy travesuras, and the kid has got a crush on this girl named Joana Padilla, who everybody calls Joana La Fregona because she's so tough. She's unapproachable, and he writes her a poem, and she just folds it up and sticks it in her back pocket like it's a restroom pass. And this the typical ups and downs of being a 12-year-old boy, but seen through the eyes of this kind of sensitive kid who is in his own kind of Nepantla. So I was able to explore all kinds of really interesting thematic things. And the book is like really, really resonated. Like I said, it's like it got the Tomas Rivera, it got awards from the American Library Association. It's on multiple states reading lists, and it's just done super, super well. And I'm very proud of it. And I just translated it into Spanish. It's coming out. Penguin Random House is putting out in Spanish through their Vintage Espanol imprint, and it was great. That I was so happy that because the way it works is they bought the translation rights, and that usually means that somebody else translated it. Like somebody else translated my book, Feathered Serpent, Dark Heart of Sky, into Spanish. But then they reached out to me and they said, "Be willing to translate it because we want to preserve the voice of this."
All right, so not only is our sound not working, I think David's frozen, but I could be wrong. Maybe I'm frozen. That's the way some of these glitches have been working. Oh, Dave's still talking. No, he's frozen. All right. Let's see if he unfreezes in a second. Otherwise, we're gonna have to just do a part 2 of this. David Bowles interview. David Bowles. Pardon me. This has been really good though. I learned a lot. Oh yeah, he's definitely gone. All right, let's see if he rejoins. If not, we'll have David back for another session, as we have done a few times now. It's Facebook. It's live. It's Zoom, which has got a bunch of hiccups right now because I think Zoom usually has hiccups around this hour. Because traffic. I think which is no discredit to Zoom. I mean, it's a question of just the fact that I don't know if it was built to have this many people on it at the same time. We're all at home right now, trying to make content. All right, so I'm gonna tune out. I'm gonna try and have a part 2, and that's what we're gonna do. Thank you for joining us for this hour, and just remember, just because we're locked in doesn't mean we have to be locked out. Physical distance, not social distance, and let's all take care of ourselves. Oh, never mind. No, wait. Give me all these dramatic speeches, and then he's back. Maybe you can hear me. David, can you hear me now? Hey, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
All right. So I was giving this big dramatic speech about where we're going as a people and this and that. And I'm like, and we're gonna have part 2 with David.
And then boom.
Now everything's gonna be anticlimactic.
Oh, I know. I'm sorry. No, this is no. This is totally me just like trying to. This is us, man, in this age that we live in, right? Trying to make it work. Yeah.
So we're talking about
everybody in their.
Oh yeah, everybody and their mom's on right now.
Right. Okay, so should I do this? You want me to read?
Yes. Let's hear the poem.
Okay, so if you don't mind, what I want to do is I'm going to read Border Folk and then I'm going to read Border Kid. They're relatively short. It shouldn't be too bad. So I want people to see the difference so they can understand what I did. Okay. It was 1983. Saturdays, my dad would rouse me early, the dawn fumbling blind through the dense South Texas fog, and we'd drive across the bridge into Nuevo Progreso, the river roiling and rushing far below. I was always struck by the skewed sameness, the familiar differences that tease the mind, the town a shadow sister of mine and others along the verge of here and there, Spanish in mostly all the expected spots, English missing from official signage but cropping up unexpected like hints of jalapeno in the midst of sweetness. Tourists smiling, delighted at the broken but earnest messages of curio shops and street vendors, dentists and cops. We would have breakfast in the same restaurant, Dad sipping café de olla while I drank my chocolate, savoring the hints of cinnamon and vanilla, sweet beating my face as I ate my huevos rancheros. We would stroll along the uneven sidewalks, perusing goods, Dad stopping to chat with strangers or familiar faces, all of them willing. Time-worn greetings and topics interwoven into a woof my adolescent eyes could nearly see in the air, dense Spanish sparkling with ancient hospitality. I was a silent güero, pale and freckled, so unlike my darker father, but my copper hair was tousled all the same. We would load the car with Mexican Cokes and Joya, so much tastier, more refreshing than American drinks, glass bottles tinkling like angel bells. And driving out to the edge of town to the Pemex station, we would fill Dad's guzzler to the brim with gasoline before heading home. I remember asking once, as he paid the attendant and exchanged a joke, why we could speak Spanish despite our surname, why all my cousins were Garzan Perez and Casas, why I was cursed to stand out, not just because of my Anglo mother, but also because of his imprecise heritage, a man that straddled ethnicities without a word of explanation. We are border folk, he said with a wry grin, bloodlines that cross and recross boundaries of river and class and culture. Each of us is who he is, wholly unique unto himself, a wondrous admixture of language and tradition. Do not be ashamed. There's no limit you cannot cross, for you are frontier forged. Now, 30 years later, I traverse that bridge with my own son, dark like my father, child of a Mexican mother and this Chicano man. I pull into a spot along the empty streets, a quick "Aileen cargo" to the brown-shirted entrepreneurial ad hoc parking attendant. We walk together into the same eatery. I have coffee, he sips chocolate. There's a stillness here that worries me, an unraveling of tapestries that seems to mirror my own losses. On the street, music jangles awkward into the emptiness. A few tourists ignore the government warnings and wander like us. Vendors smile and hawk their wares, willing to chat through, though with a forced casualness that their twitching eyes belie. My son wants us to hurry. We've come to pick up his glasses. That is what this place has become for me, cheap medicine and car repair. The border is diminished, border folk unmoored. I give the attendant a 10 peso coin. We drive back in silence. The river roils, rushes. So it's decidedly an adult poem, like grappling with like all kinds of adult concerns. And so what I did with Border Kid, to take some of the same complexity but like make it a little more appealing to younger kids, was obviously to shorten it a lot and then focus on particular thing. And obviously it was written several years later, so things had changed. It's fun to be a Border Kid, to wake up early Saturdays and cross the bridge to Mexico with my dad. The town's like a mirror twin of our own, with Spanish spoken everywhere just the same, but English mostly missing till it pops up like grains of sugar on a chili pepper. We have breakfast in our favorite restaurant. Dad sips café de olla while I drink chocolate. Then we walk down uneven sidewalks, chatting with strangers and friends in both languages. Later, we load our car with Mexican Cokes and Joya, avocados and cheese, tasty reminders of our roots. Waiting in line at the bridge, though, my smile fades. The border fence stands tall and ugly, invading the carrizo at the river's edge. Dad sees me staring, puts his hand on my shoulder. Don't worry, mijo. You're a border kid, a foot on either bank. Your ancestors crossed this river 1,000 times. No wall, no matter how tall, can stop your heritage from flowing forever like the Rio Grande itself. So you could see how you could pack a lot of the same messages and texture into a poem for younger people, while bringing the wonders down to their reading level, if you know what I mean.
Right, right. And also speaking to the way they would experience things. Like they have a different set
Yeah,
of
yeah, exactly.
skills, a different set of like they're being told things from their parents as opposed to like they are telling things to the world when you're an adult. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
perspective. It's really interesting to me when you've mentioned the border and border over again. I don't I grew up in a Los Angeles, in a part of Los Angeles called El Sereno, which is part of the kind of the east side. And so I didn't grow up anywhere near the border, but every time I hear this, I think about when I was a kid. There was like this dirt lot. There was a fruteria where they would put like these green tarps up over. And I think around 8 or so, they started developing, put up like a mini mall kind of thing, and all of a sudden they put up a brick wall, you know. And then when I was about a year after that, they put barbed wire over that wall. So we went from me being able to walk across to this fruteria to now there's these businesses, and now there's a brick wall. And now beyond the brick wall, there's barbed wire on that brick wall. And by the time when the barbed wire goes up, I think I'm around 11 or 12. And so that was kind of my first understanding that, like, holy crap, like this is not, like this is fucked up. Like I didn't do anything, but you're putting these walls around me. You're putting barbed wire
Yeah.
on the walls. And so I think that you talk about the border, but there are many borders that we face in this country, and there are many border walls like that this is part of our everyday life. Can you speak a little bit to like just about like what is it you're trying to what is when you're writing, like I don't know, when conducting these interviews, and it's a constant theme of people being
Um,
punished for being what there's a constant theme of people being punished for being like smart Mexicans, right? And
yeah.
well, yeah, tell us about that. Tell us about the first time you were punished for being a smart Mexican.
Well, I mean, one of the things about being a güero is that people just assume that that you can get away with it, and you kind of get away with it in a way that other people wouldn't. And it's only when you begin to um, let me give you an example. That's not from my own life, but James de Anda, Mexican American lawyer, one of the main lawyers in the Hernandez v. Texas fight in 1955 that was heard by the Supreme Court right after Brown versus the Board of Education, guy who helped to desegregate the Corpus Christi school system and so forth, second Mexican American to be made a federal judge. When he came back from World War II and decided to be a lawyer and graduated from law school, an Anglo friend of his said, "Hey Jimmy, I know I can get you a job with my dad. My dad is an executive at one of these big oil companies, and you can get in the legal department, and you'll be set for life." And so James Danda said, "All right, fine." And he went there. They gave him the paperwork to fill out. Now, James Danda was a light-skinned Mexicano with green eyes, light hair, and this last name Danda that sounded like vaguely Mediterranean. And so a lot of people assumed that he was something other than Latino, that he was Italian or Greek or something like that, right? Towards the end of the application, he came to a point where it said nationality of your parents, because remember, this is in the aftermath of World War II, and people really cared about that kind of stuff. They still do, and he sat there for a long time, realizing that if he told the truth, that he was not going to get that job. But ultimately, he wrote down Mexico, and it was like a decisive moment for him, because up to that point, he'd been able to allow people to make assumptions. And I grew up because my heritage is kind of not immediately visible. People look at me and they're like, "What? You don't quite look Anglo, but you don't quite look Mexican. Well, what are you?" That kind of thing. It was easy for me, and then with a like last name like Bowles, it was easier for me to allow people to make whatever assumptions they wanted to make, especially after my dad left, because my dad abandoned us. And in the aftermath of his abandoning us, I was alienated from the Mexican American side of my family, so it was easy to just go along with the assumption that people made that I wasn't. And people would speak in Spanish in front of me, and then sometimes it would reach a point where it'd be like, "Ya, güey, te entiendo todo lo que me estás diciendo."
Yeah.
And I'd be like, "Oh, you what? You speak Spanish?" I'm like, "Wait, soy Chicano," and then people they just assumed otherwise. And so in the 80s, living in Section 8 housing, on food stamps, whatever, every little advantage I could get out of life, mattered. But the minute, man, so I went to PSJ High School, Far San Juan Alamo High School, here in the Rio Grande Valley. The minute people realized that I was, as they put it, half white and half Mexican American, I don't think that you can be half of a culture. Like, you are what you are. And so I identify as Chicano and not as white, not as Anglo. Immediately things began to change. Then people were like, te crees bien acá porque tu mamá es gringa. And then like I started catching shit for being the smart Mexican from, mainly from other students, because we were all Mexican American. The teachers were Mexican American. Like, there was nobody in in that um, in that setting that was looking at us from the outside. It was all about us judging each other, and you
Yeah.
know about what that feels like. Um, I guess the first time that um, that I ever felt like anything weird was when I became a TA at the University of Texas Pan American back when it was UTPA. Um, there was a real suspicion by people in English department at the time of anybody coming out of Mexican American culture and Valley schools into higher education. They just assumed that you couldn't possibly be as intelligent as they were. You couldn't possibly be as well read or well schooled or any of those things because you'd come out of Valley schools, you came from a Mexican American family. How in the world could you possibly compete with people who are coming to Texas from Ivy League schools or like wherever, right? And so that was when I began to feel like professionally this ad in it that it still exists at UTRGV to some extent. The the majority of people working there are people who are not from the Valley. Um, even the Mexican Americans, even the Latinos that work are not from the Valley because of the difficulty of your, you know, first of all, as we talked about at the very beginning, if you leave and go off and follow your dreams, you're probably not coming back. And if you get a degree here in the Rio Grande Valley at this institution, you can't teach here, right? So it's this complication of because I got my doctorate at UTPA before it was dissolved and made UTRGV. Now I'm there, so I am like the guy who is from here, who went to school, in McAllen, graduated from PSJA and FAR. All my degrees are from a local university. My bachelor's, my master's, my doctorate. I am like puro Bayuco, 100%. And there's a reluctance that, at first I felt a reluctance from some of my peers to see me as being somebody who could be competitive with them. But clearly, I mean, I publish more than the majority of people that I know, both academically and in periodicals and in newspapers, New York Times, stuff like that. And I do a lot, and it makes me feel. I mean, I don't. It's not a pride that I feel in myself. It's a pride that I feel in. See, we do turn out incredible minds. This place is fertile and rich academically and in terms of scholarship and philosophy. Gloria Anzaldúa freaking came from here.
Yeah.
Some great minds came from here. And this attitude that people have about Mexican Americans in general, and then in my case, I really feel like about people from the borderland specifically, that how in the world could we possibly be at their level, is just it irritates me to no end. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not. That's an indirect answer to your question, but I hope that helps.
No, it helps a lot. I mean, like, one of the things that, like, it's a really, so I kind of got involved here in California with the ethnic studies struggle, and one of the things I constantly hear that people are saying, like the schools, is they want to adopt schools that want to adopt it, that are not trying to fight it. They want to adopt some of these things, but they want to make sure that in adopting this brand of literature, or adopting our literature, not this brand, adopting, taking on some of our shit, that they don't lose any rigor. Because
I always hear that kind of thing.
that's just
It's
so goddamn racist. I mean, like, and I
yeah,
take a lot of personal fucking shit with that, because like this thing I wrote is full of so many goddamn references. It's full of so many. I challenge people to find something that has this many historical references to that much in that short of space.
yeah.
Like,
It is jam packed. Yeah.
like anybody, like black, white, Latino, Asian. I'm fine. I mean, like other people do things a lot better than I do, but that thing, that thing that requires rigor, I'm pretty high level.
Yep. Plenty of rigor. This is the same thing we hear when
And
we're
you're
fighting.
like 5 languages like all at once. I mean, like that. I mean, like
Yeah.
that rigor, right?
Yeah. No. I mean, basically, I mean, again, ya sé que some people are going to say, "What a stuck-up little freak," but I will put my mind up against the mind of anybody. Especially in the humanities. I don't feel that because I didn't go to an Ivy League school, or because I didn't live in an affluent neighborhood, or because my family's working class, that I'm in any degree intellectually inferior to anybody at all. Anybody, literally anybody.
Yeah.
And and I feel that way about a whole bunch of us. We hold our own. The thing is, because we make our own rules, because we break with those intellectual academic traditions, and we don't do things, we don't walk down that beaten path that all of them will walk down. We find our own way to the same destination. I don't think we should be dismissed. And we see this in the publishing world as well. This notion, people are like, well, maybe there aren't as many Latino authors because publishers are looking for quality work. Fuck you. Publishers are looking for what sells. They're not looking for quality. If they were looking for quality, only like literary fiction and poetry and like intellectual things, they're looking for what sells. They want to make money. So don't talk to me about quality. What they're looking for, if there's an audience for it, they will acquire it and sell it. That is what it boils down to. And so when people pop off with that like knee-jerk reactionary kind of attitude about our insistence on equity, I shut them down immediately. Are you trying to imply that the reason that there aren't enough Latino writers in publishing is that we don't write well, that our work is inferior, that we don't have quality writing? Because that's clearly nonsense, and it's clearly racist, as you put it. It's racist to even have that thought.
So for people watching this, think that like that you're full of shit and like how dare you like be so arrogant or me or whatever, be arrogant or well it's embarrassing to even have to have this conversation.
Yeah,
like, it's embarrassing, and the reason we're having it is because you're saying this stuff. It's because that's the reason we have to have it. Like,
yeah, it's like heads ups.
Like, oh,
yeah, exactly. Right. Matt and I are like, hey guys, stop being racists, and we won't have this conversation anymore.
Yeah.
Pretty simple.
Yeah.
But it is just these ingrained, unreflected upon, just almost instinctual ways of moving through the world with privilege that blind people to the deeply ingrained racism in so much of the way they respond to people who are not like them. It's really disgusting and sad.
So getting to people who are like us, like you, can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to work, or what it has been like to work with Cinco Puntos Press?
Well, Cinco Puntos is they're really, really awesome. It's a small outfit, family run. They've been working for 35 years to put out books that maybe other people don't take a chance on as much. I think part of it happened willy-nilly because they were just looking for things that resonated with them, that they thought were important, without thinking so much about at the beginning, at least, about viability and marketability and stuff like that. It's like good stuff that like was meaningful. And in the process, they've put out a lot of books by Mexican Americans and indigenous people and Native Americans and so forth, and done some really, really incredible work and built up this corpus of authentic own voices literature for children and adults, that I think now that Bobby's semi-retired and Lee, I assume, is his wife, is going to eventually be handing those reins over to their son John and the rest of the team, they can be really proud of, and we can feel proud because they're everybody talks about allies. They're co-conspirators. They're not allies. They're like, they're comrades. They're in the trenches with the rest of us, doing the hard work that needs to be done to fix the situation in publishing, and give us more equity. And so, it's one of the reasons that the main friends of Güero, and they call me Güero, are all named Roberto or Robert, and they're called Los Bobbies, as a tip of my hat to Bobby Bird, because they do really, really important work. And they're kind of, I'm not trying to say that I'm a king or anything, but people have called them kingmakers, because Benjamin Alire Sáenz, Luis Urrea, Isabel Quintero. The people whose careers they have launched, it's an impressive roster when you start taking a look at it. And they know how to find talent and polish it and then push it as hard as they can. One thing they really, really know how to do is to market you like nobody's business. They know every prize they need to send your book to. They know they have good relationships with their distributors, and they talk your book up, so the distributors will go and talk your book up to all these booksellers and get it in the hands of readers all across the United States. They do a really great job.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And again, the importance of independent presses.
Yeah, oh my God, cannot be overstated. Independent presses are doing God's work, dude.
So I'm really impressed and grateful for the work that you were able to do with against Flatiron and Macmillan alongside Gerba and Lovato, and as well as other people that present Matt Nelson and the team. But I kind of feel like in addition to that, in addition to taking it to them at the big, we really do have to get in a position where these independent presses are networked, you know what I mean, and can work together in ways that can amplify our books. I mean, like for instance, Incopoto's done a really good job because I've seen your books in LA in different places, right, where you have not been, right? So they are getting your book. It's not like you came and dropped it off, right? So like
right. They have a really good distribution model, yeah.
Right, and so we need like our independent press to get better distribution models. But what I've been thinking more about as I've been having these conversations with people is that what we really have to do is link, these open mics, these venues, these reading series, right, that are all over the place, to the independent presses in a way where it becomes part of the culture of running an open mic, the culture of having an independent press is to have these things linked and merged, because that's one thing the major companies don't have, the big corporations don't have. They have the bookstores, they have the media. In some cases, they are the media, but they don't have like the poetry venues. They don't have that, right? And they don't have the open readings. They don't have the organic things that we just pull up. So I think that if we had that, we'd have a wide distribution network that's actually more competitive than the Barnes and Noble. Like I can say in my city, okay, that city has one Barnes and Noble, but that city has 3 open mics, right? And if we had something like that, I mean, it'd be a different ballgame.
Yeah, no, especially for like the kinds of the literary fiction and quirky genre stuff and poetry that tend to be the mainstay of a lot of these smaller presses. Definitely true. Yeah, I mean, umbrella organizations. One of the things is, and you will have noticed this. One of the things that we need to get past is the intense desire to be competing with one another. You see it with open mic. So one of the things that I saw in the Valley around the time that Flower Song first started as Val Publishing was there seemed to be like a movement kind of gelling, like a larger movement with lots of different smaller currents blending together into a huge river of creative endeavors that brought together the things that Edward was doing, the things that Valley Artistic Outreach was doing, that Julieta Corpus and a bunch of other Daniel Garcia Ordaz, a bunch of like major like local literary figures and who organize open mic stuff like that were beginning to kind of come together in this sense of solidarity. But invariably, because we're human beings, jealousies pop up, competition pops up, people getting kind of hurt feelings about being left out of the loop on something. Like these things tend to impact our ability to forge like alliances, especially because indie presses tend to be formed by people who are very independent and who are not really keen on being part of like larger structures. So part of the trick is finding the right organic structure that is fair and that's going to give people give organizations and venues like equal footing. And like if that can be resolved, I think we'll be closer to accomplishing the kind of thing you suggest.
Okay, well, again, it's competition, right? But it's one thing to compete, and it's another thing to hate. You know what I mean? Like people just start hating all the time. Like
yeah.
Don't stop hating. Like
like
get your stuff out there. Don't hate on somebody just because they're doing something. Do likewise.
And to some extent, I feel like a lot of that is like toxic, very USian kind of cultural or this kind of like, we like to call it self colonization or interiorized, um oh, these different terms we use to kind of indicate the fact that we've foregone maybe more ancestral ways of organizing ourselves and treating one another in favor of like this competitive smack talking, like rap battle kind of attitude about artistic endeavors that we kind of need to get past. It's not capitalism. I'm sorry, poetry, my friends, it's not capitalism. It's the farthest thing from capitalism that there fucking is. If you are a capitalist, don't write poetry because you're not going to make any money off of it. Not in the capitalist sense. There's a different reason for doing that than making money. Anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you 100%.
Okay. So we're coming up. We're well over the hour, but it's been a really immersive conversation, and I've learned a lot from it. Learned a lot about the Rio Grande Valley, and I really, really appreciate your time.
Oh yeah.
Is there what are the upcoming projects you have to promote, and what are the upcoming projects you have to promote?
So of my own artistic creation, I've got a chapter book series that's launching in July from HarperCollins. Chapter books are books for like young readers, ages 5 to like 10, and it's called 13th Street, and it's like basically the pitch is a Latinx Stranger Things from kids ages 5 to 10, featuring these three primos who are drawn into this otherworldly place called 13th Street, and they have to get past cucuys and all kinds of other weird things to get back. And it's a great fun series, and that incorporates Spanish in books that are trying to get kids to read. It's nothing. You don't normally do that. Like nobody would have allowed me to do that 2 or 3 or 5 years ago, because throwing in Spanish will make it even more complicated for these struggling readers, would have been the attitude, and they've let me do it. And then I've got 2 graphic novels coming out in the fall and winter. The first in the graphic novel series called Tales of the Feathered Serpent. It's a series of 10 retellings of different Mayan and Aztec myths, pulled from my book Feathered Serpent, Dark Hearted Sky, but adapted for a graphic novel. And the first one is called The Rise of the Halfling King, which is a retelling of the Dwarf of Uxmal Mayan myth. And then the second one is the one I talked about before, Clockwork Curandera, the first volume. And then I've got my translation of They Call Me Güero, which is Me Dicen Güero, Poemas de un Chavo Fronterizo, that comes out in November. The translation of my book Feathered Serpent, Dark Hearted Sky into Spanish comes out in like 2 weeks on May 12th. And then sometime later this year, my translation of La Ruta del Hielo y la Sal, which is this incredible horror novella from Mexican author Jose Luis Zarate, comes out. I translate it into English, and that's coming out from a small indie press out of Canada, actually, that's run by Silvia Moreno Garcia, a really successful writer who's published by some of the big 5, but who continues to do this kind of like indie press stuff to put out the voices. Like one of the things that she wants to do right now is to put out a lot of work by Mexican authors that's not been translated. And it's a great novella that tells from, the novel Dracula, right, where Dracula travels from Romania to England aboard the ship, the Demeter, and it kind of like drifts into port in London, and everybody's like missing, and the captain is dead, and he's tied to the keel, to the wheel, and it's about that journey, and it's this great queer erotic horror novella that is going to blow people's minds. So beautifully written, and it was such a pleasure to translate. So I've got a lot of stuff coming out, and then next year my debut children's book is coming out in the summer called My Two Border Towns, coming out in English and in Spanish. Book 4 of my Garza Twin series is coming out. My translation of a book by a Mexican author, a collection of indigenous sacred stories, is coming out as well. So lots of stuff coming up. People can just check out my website, davidbowles.us, or follow me on Twitter at David O. Bowles. I don't really do Facebook very much. So those of you who are watching me on Facebook, you probably know that I pop in from time to time or accidentally post stuff from Instagram. But I am philosophically opposed, politically opposed to Facebook because of its insistence on supporting Trump and promoting racist right-wing propaganda and thrusting it down our throats and trying to influence the election like it did already in 2016. So I keep my page alive, but eventually I'm just going to shut it down. And I just encourage people to get the hell off of Facebook. Basically, it's abominable. But anyway.
But until you do, enjoy this video.
Yeah, enjoy this video, share it with your friends, and then get off of Facebook. Yeah.
So you're having a banner year, David, and next year it sounds like it's gonna keep going. It's gonna be the summer of bowls, and I'm really excited.
And I would say there's the one thing that I can't talk about yet is a like pretty massive like Hollywood project that I'm involved with that eventually word will come out. Just that word would have already come out. Word would already come out. Word would have already come out were it not for COVID-19 kind of postponing filming and stuff like that. But soon you guys will hear about a project that I'm involved with. It's really super cool.
Celebrating author
struggling with irregular verbs. Doctorate English professor can't say the past tense of the verb come. Yeah. All right, man. It was great talking to you, Matt.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it. And thank you everyone for watching.
Yeah. Bye, guys.